Hello everybody and welcome back to my Magic the Gathering Commander Deck List Reviews. So this is a series where I either review my own personal Commander decks or those submitted by users and break them out into their core mechanics. I review the Commander, I go over what the deck's kind of generally trying to do, give my critiques, and wrap it all up with my feedback at the end. If you want to get your own decks powered up, make sure to go to the top link in the description below where you can get your decks personally reviewed by me. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. Today we've got a really cool, I kind of been a bit of a trend here of all of the precon commanders from the Tarkir Dragonstorm decks. And today we've got the Mardu one, or one of the Mardu ones, with Zurgo Stormrender. So this is a really neat card. I like kind of where it's going, the sort of functions of the card. So of course it's Mardu. It's a red, white, and a black card, 3/3. A legendary creature, Orc Warrior. He's got Mobilize 1, which is a mechanic that says whenever this creature attacks, create a tapped and attacking 1/1 Red Warrior creature token, sack at the beginning of the next end step. So there's a lot of creatures in this set, especially within like the Mardu color identity that have Mobilize, which, you know, kind of plays into his ability here. That says whenever a creature token you control leaves the battlefield, draw a card if it was attacking, otherwise each opponent loses 1 life. So this mechanic is sort of capitalizing right on Mobilize. You know, whether the creatures die during combat, which is kind of the best outcome, because not only, you know, are you making people block, you get to draw cards, and if not, they die to their own triggers, and they still, each opponent gets to lose a life. So that's kind of the big thing here, and that's definitely what we're kind of built towards, you know, either Aristocrat, sort of an Aristocrat's tokens, you know, attack trigger type deck. A lot of different things here, but I think it's kind of a unique way to go about it. You know, Mardu can just kind of be treasure tokens or creature tokens are more towards, you know, one side or the other, but I think this is a really good mix of all of them, sort of like the Sultai deck I did last week. It's in a very similar vein where it kind of mixes things together and kind of gives us a new sort of play structure to play around with. So yeah, that's kind of the big thing here. This is a bracket 3 deck, so we do have, I believe, 1 game changer in Jessica's Will, and I do think, you know, there's a lot of synergy in here where we very much, you know, put a lot of big expensive cards in here that, you know, do a lot of powerful effects, and so I would definitely put that in that category because we're just so heavily synergized. Kind of taking the basic idea of what the precon wants to do, and this is very heavily upgraded, very heavily modified into ways to kind of build on the specific structures of that deck, because a lot of precons, you know, are sort of generalized, so we're kind of breaking that down to, okay, we're making tokens, we're attacking with them, and we're sacrificing them. That's kind of the main thing we're doing here. So of course, first of all, we've got the Aristocrats sort of thing. So when we sacrifice creatures, you know, whether they die or we sacrifice them or, you know, what have you, just any death triggers from our creatures, especially the tokens, because we're making a lot of them, we have ways to capitalize on that. So Bloodthirst, of course, is one of the biggest ones. Whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is actually kind of the lesser of 2 effects with Zulaport Cutthroat. The only difference between the two is Zulaport only cares about your creatures dying, but it drains everyone for 1 instead of just 1 target player. But Bloodthirst, of course, because of the general effect, you know, if there's a board wipe, you have a lot of stuff on the board, and if opponents have a lot of stuff, you're getting a bunch of triggers left with everyone's things. But a lot of times in this deck, Zulaport Cutthroat is even better because you're mostly sacrificing a lot of your stuff, and, you know, sometimes in large portions. So that's kind of nice. Mirkwood Bats not only cares about our creation of tokens, but also when we sacrifice them, making opponents lose life. It's kind of the best of both worlds, and, you know, we're going to be making and sacrificing a lot of them, usually in the same turn even. So that's very nice with that. Pitiless Plunder, whenever another creature you control dies, you create a treasure token, so that's very nice. You know, this is kind of at a point in Magic where just one of those key mechanics and one of those wordings needed to be changed around to make it not as powerful as it is. You know, the Pitiless Plunder goes infinite a lot of different times because it just says when a creature dies, not a token creature, which is awesome for our stuff because we're making a bunch of token creatures, and, you know, when they die or they, you know, we sacrifice them, what have you, we're getting a bunch of treasure tokens for that, which is really nice. And of course, one of the biggest ones here is Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp, whenever the equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards. And really the broken part about this is it gives equipped creature +1/-1 as an equipment. And we're making mostly 1/1 tokens. So we can basically pay 1 mana, equip it to a creature. It, of course, gets the -1 to its backside. So it goes to 0 toughness, dies, and we automatically draw 2 cards from that. So it's kind of a 1 mana draw engine over and over and over again, which is really good. That's why the card is running a bunch of decks. It's even in the precon for that specific reason. So that's really cool there. For board wipes, kind of not a whole lot here. We are very much centered on attacking widely, so there's not a whole lot of board wipe stuff that we really care about. You know, you could add 1 or 2, or even if you wanted to add something more specific, because we are running so much stuff that has a very low power. I don't think we really exceed 4 most of the time. You could run more of the board wipes, like an austere command where you can get rid of things depending on, you know, the mana value, or just things based on power and toughness. That's another thing, but, you know, I just like Blast from the Sack because it's more of a range. where you don't have to use it right when you need it, and a lot of times we're not using this, of course, if we have a big amount of creatures out, but it can still be a 1-mana board wipe, which is, you know, you're running that in a lot of decks just because it's that good. Vandal Blast is sort of a board wipe. It's very much an interaction piece where it can destroy an artifact, but I can still consider it a board wipe because it has an overload cost to destroy all artifacts we don't control. You know, there's so many aspects of Commander anymore that revolves around artifacts, whether that just be, you know, straight up artifact decks, you know, or we're doing, you know, some sort of token variety of either food, clue, or treasure. Usually the treasure sort of thing, like someone's got a Smothering Tide and they're sitting on a bunch of treasures. This is really awesome for that kind of thing. Does a lot of damage a lot of times equal to a board wipe, or sometimes more if someone is really in that artifact deck, you know, getting into creatures as well as artifacts and what have you. But yeah, not a lot in the board wipe category because we want to really keep a lot on our board and more protect that rather than get rid of everyone else's. So we have quite a bit of card advantage here. A lot of it kind of depends on what we got going on and can be kind of based on our tokens as well. Of course, Skull Clamp, we already talked about, draws us cards, really, really nice. Kind of one of the good ones because it's repeatable. We have some of these Village Rites type effects where you sacrifice a creature's additional cost to draw cards. Don't want to run too many of these in here. I try to kind of shy away from a lot of those because if you're relying on creatures to be able to do, you know, any of your card draw effects, they're really bad early game when you don't have a token to sacrifice to them. If you have to sacrifice a real creature, or if you just don't have any creatures yet, this is just kind of a dead card in your hand, or kind of a bad one a lot of times. So you want to be kind of careful with that. And that's just a general thing for token decks, and you know, in general, is the fact that you want to balance the number of tokens that you're creating with the things that kind of capitalize on those tokens. So the big one is like the doubling effects. You know, there's only one doubling effect in the entire deck because you want to make sure that you're making tokens, and, you know, if you can double those tokens, that's nice. But if you have a bunch of effects that double tokens, or that, you know, care about tokens being out, but you don't have the effects that create those tokens, they're more of just kind of win more cards. We don't really want to make sure that we centralize around making the tokens, because if we don't have them, you know, that shuts off a lot of our deck. Caesar, he's a really cool card, does a lot of cool stuff for this deck, but he says whenever he attacks, you can sacrifice a creature. If you do, choose 2, create 2 1/1 red creatures. The main thing here is draw a card and you lose a life, so that's kind of nice, gets rid of our creature, so of course we draw off of our commander. And that's another thing to note here as well. As Zurgo is going to be creating tokens, and you can actually stack any mobilize or these attack or create token abilities. Have his go off to where you make a tapped and attacking creature and then resolve Caesar's ability. Now that you have the creature, you can sacrifice that. Because it was attacking, he will trigger drawing you a card, and then Caesar will also trigger to draw you a card. So that's kind of a nice weird little thing there, but he does a lot for the deck, but mostly for this specific category is that card draw there. Caretaker's Count is another one of the sort of repeatable card draw effects on a permanent, or whenever one or more tokens you control enter, draw a card. This ability triggers once each turn. Mostly just the turn, you know, we attack with a mobilized creature, we get an extra card draw. That's good enough a lot of the time, especially because we're in Mardu. You know, our card draw isn't the best, but this kind of repeatable stuff really does matter in the long term. We can make more tokens by leveling it up, and, you know, the end thing of, you know, paying the 4, leveling it up to 3, and giving our creature tokens +2/+2 is kind of nice. It does a lot of different stuff, but really that repeatable card draw is kind of the biggest part of it. Daily Dispute, this is a really cool one. You can either sacrifice an artifact or a creature. Very few artifacts in the deck, it's almost always a creature, but you draw 2 cards and create a treasure token, so this is one of the better of these sort of Village Rites effects in the deck, because we get the 2 cards and create the treasure, so we get a little bit back on our mana. Idol of Oblivion, of course, you get to pay 2 for this artifact and draw a card, activate only if you've created a token this turn, which, you know, at the very least, it's basically just going to be a Caretaker's Talent effect, where we're creating tokens or trying to every single turn. You know, Mobilize makes that really easy, and then we get to draw an extra card for our troubles. And Jessica's Will, that is our one game changer in the deck. It does a lot of different stuff, or a lot of really good stuff. Very flexible card, but really it's the second mode of exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. So a little extra card advantage through that. Plummet of Forbidden is one of my favorites because it can kind of go the biggest of all of these, which has an additional cost to cast this spell. You may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy the spell for each creature you sacrifice this way. So just by itself, it's a 2 mana, draw a card, lose a life, not very good. But for each creature you sack, when you cast this, you get to copy the spell, so you get to draw another card, lose another life. You kind of want to be careful with this because, of course, you can overcommit, or, you know, sacrifice too many things and not have really a board around, and it does lose you life when you're drawing the cards. But, you know, if you've got, you know, 3 extra tokens you don't need around, or you have a little bit of expendability, you can very much make this a really good and a really efficient card draw engine, which is why I really love it. Professional Facebreaker does a lot of different things, but it has the last ability of sacrifice a treasure, takes out the top card of your library, and we play it this turn, so another, you know, sort of Impulse Draw effect. With that, speaking of Impulse Draw, we have Ren's Resolve. It's, there's a lot of effects in these type of decks, and I like to run these over a lot of the other, Tormenting Voice type effects where it's discard as initial cost to draw. I would way rather a lot of times just exile the top two, especially these ones that say you can play till the end of your next turn. So even if you get, one or two lands out of that, most of the time you're able to play those cards, and you're not having to discard anything. So it's just pure card advantage. You don't need to worry about having stuff in your hand to get rid of. You can just get more cards out of it. Last but not least, we have Viscera Seer. Its ability, when you sacrifice a creature, you get to scry a card. So it's not complete card advantage, but I wanted to throw it in this category because it really can help a lot of times, especially if you have a good amount of tokens to sacrifice to kind of dig through your deck until you get the thing you want on top. And of course, if you use this card in tandem with most of the others, where you get to, draw cards or exile cards off of that, you can kind of stack the deck to get what you really want, which is very nice. And then sort of a weird side category here, but there was enough cards in it that I kind of wanted to make it out. And it's something you can also add more to the deck and kind of push that archetype more is enters triggers, so a lot of ETB stuff. Mostly here are the fact of, the Impact Tremors effects. Whenever a creature you control enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So Impact Tremors just does that. War Leader's Call does that and gives your creatures +1/+1, so it's an anthem on top of that, which is why it's really good. Just because we are making tokens, capitalize that on as much as possible. And, if you're making 10 tokens, dealing 10 damage to everyone's a really good effect. Of course, Perforos is the best one here. Whenever another creature enters, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. It's an indestructible creature most of the time. And if you really want to, it does have a cool activated ability to give your creatures +1/+0 till end of turn for 3 mana, which on 1/1 creatures, doubling their power matters a whole lot. And even those minuscule pump effects can be really nice. And speaking of, in terms of ETB triggers, these also count, and they're nice in that they also give pseudo haste. So they do the exact same thing. They just say whenever another creature enters, it gets +2/+0 and gains haste till end of turn. Exact same thing, even the same mana cost. The only cool thing here is Enduring Courage. When it dies, it comes back as an enchantment. If it was a creature, it's part of that enduring cycle that does that. So this is cool not only if you play this and then you play this is just when a creature enters, so you can have that apply to Zurgo. He gets haste, so when he can immediately attack, you pump him a little bit. But the cool part about this is when your tokens enter tapped and attacking, they also get that pump till in a turn. So, if you have a lot of mobilized triggers, you're also making a bunch of huge creatures. So it's that double effect of not only allowing you to immediately attack with your mobilized creatures to get that trigger a lot faster, but then pumping the creatures it does make. So it's that twofold really nice synergistic ability with that. In terms of interaction, we kind of have a lot of weird amounts of interaction here and there. Some anti-interaction, the most notable being Voice of Victory. So this is a creature with mobilized too, which is kind of nice. It's only 2 mana, but it's one of those sort of effects that says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. So Grand Abolisher type thing. But this is kind of better than Grand Abolisher because it's got a better mana cost to pay for, and it's got the mobilized ability. The only difference between this and Grand Abolisher is opponents can still activate abilities, but abilities that really matter on your turn are so few and far between that it doesn't really matter. We mostly care about the casting. So if someone tries to remove our crap, they can't do it on our turn, they have to do it at some other turn. So you can kind of plan your turn in safety without having to worry about stuff getting blown up. Anarch Strike Leader, a really cool card from the precon that I liked. It says whenever you attack with a creature and your commander, Anarch Strike Leader is a really cool card from the precon that I was, glad to be able to add to this deck. This is whenever you attack with this creature and or your commander, for each opponent, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking that player. So sort of a myriad Adeline sort of effect, I would say, which is kind of nice. But the big thing here for interaction pieces is the sacrifice to this creature tokens you control gain indestructible till end of turn. And that's a lot of what these effects do for interaction, is keeping our creatures and usually creature tokens around, because we're going to be massing a big board, and people are going to be wanting to board up a lot of the time because you're having a lot of different stuff happen. If they want a Wrath because you've got a giant board of things, even if they can't attack directly or they have attacked someone, that's going to be a high priority on the list of players' things, of getting rid of your stuff, because that's our main game plan. So we want to keep that really protected, our game plan protected, by making sure we have a lot of these protection spells. Boros Charm being one of them. So it's got 2 different modes, or 3 different modes. The one we care about here, though, is permanents you control are indestructible in turn, and that's kind of the thing here, is that just sort of give everything indestructible effect. It does have 2 other effects. If it really mattered, you can have it deal 4 damage to target player, and you can have target creature double strike till end of turn. Double strike doesn't really matter because we don't have a whole lot of big creatures for the deck, and we don't really care about dealing 4 damage most of the time. It's really the fact that it gives all our stuff indestructible for 2 mana, which is really nice. And it's all permanents, so if someone God forbid, play some sort of mass land destruction, there you go. You got a way to sort of get around that. Clever Concealment is a card I really want them to reprint that's from an old commander deck. I believe that's OB1. It has Convoke. It's a 4-mana instant that says any number of target non-land permanents you control fades out. So it's kind of a baby's Teferi's Protection, but we're making a lot of creatures that can tap for this and sometimes make it free if you get the right tokens out. You only have to have 4 that can tap for that. We have a lot of them enter tapped and attacking, but even to be able to reduce the cost by 1 or 2 is really nice. To have something to phase out anything that we need. Very cool, really awesome card, you know, still, even though it hasn't had a reprint, is less exposed than the Teferi's Protection. I really tried to not put that card in this deck because it just, you know, for what it is, it's nice. It is also another game changer now, something to kind of take into account with a new system update. But I really like this card and kind of want to showcase that as well. Flawless Maneuver is awesome because we can get it for free if we control our commander. Gives all our creatures indestructible. And that's kind of most of our keep our stuff protected. We do have a few removal spells, so Generous Gift, of course, get rid of any permanent, give them a 3/3. We don't really care that they have the 3/3 because we're getting through with a lot of creatures most of the time. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares, just get rid of our creatures that our opponents control, more of that removal stuff. And then Ink Shield, I really love Ink Shield. It's a really, really awesome card. I've started to value fogs a lot more in the current meta because, like our deck, you know, our deck really folds to a fog because we're attacking with a bunch of stuff, and then, you know, a fog allows for a crazy amount of crackback. You know, even if we were ending up to kill the player, you can really kind of mess with you, and this is kind of the ultra fog of that. So Ink Shield is a 5-mana instant that says prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to you this turn. For each 1 damage prevented this way, create a 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying, which is absolutely insane. So whatever damage gets dealt to you, you get twice that much power back in creatures, which is pretty insane. So, you know, if someone's attacking you with 2 5/5s, you know, 10 damage worth of stuff, you create 10 2/1s, which is absolutely insane. And these things have flying, so they're going to get through most of the time on the crackback. And of course, you're protected for the turn. So this is a huge blow. It is, you have to say, quite a bit of mana, and can be sort of telegraphed depending on what you're doing. It's one of the higher mana value things in the deck. But if you're trying to play this card, you want very much the amount of upside it brings for keeping it up, even if you don't have to end up using it. It's just so monumental and gives you, you know, such a huge board on that kind of crackback that it's really worth a lot of times saving up the mana, even if you're not the one that gets attacked, or you know, they just don't end up being attacking. A very awesome card. I love showcasing it when I can because I think it's such a fun effect and really turns the tide of a game. You know, even if you didn't have any tokens out and, you know, someone hits you for that 10, you got 20 damage on them in the air. You know, that's half their life total. Usually going to hit them because of the flying. Just all around a really cool card, a really cool mechanic. Last but not least, we have Reconnaissance. So this isn't directly an interaction spell, but I kind of threw it in here. So this is a really stupidly broken enchantment that just says pay 0 to remove target attacking creature you control from combat and untap it. So this can be used in a myriad number of ways, where you can either just, hey, if your stuff gets blocked, you can untap it and remove it from combat if you don't want it to die. Basically allowing you to keep around whatever doesn't get through. You can still, you know, make sure you go white at someone, but anything, you know, that wouldn't get through anyways, you can just remove from combat. It's nice just to get attack triggers if you just wanted that. You know, that's it. You can very much do that with all our mobilized things. Even if, you know, normally the creatures you'd be attacking with would end up dying based on what the defenders have. You can very much, you know, it gives you peace of mind to be able to just get the attack triggers when you need it. And the biggest thing here out of all of it is the fact that it gives pseudo vigilance, because after the damage step, you are able to still untap this during the end of combat. So you can give all your creatures pseudo vigilance, whatever got through, whatever didn't, just untap them, remove them from combat. They've done their damage and they're ready to block. So that's kind of the biggest thing here. And it's 1 mana, has no cost for the effect. It's literally 0 mana. Amazing card, put in pretty much any white deck that has any sort of attacking ability. Just really amazing. And as for lands, we have quite a good number of good lands because they've gotten pretty cheap as of late. For one, a lot of new ones keep getting printed, which is really nice, but they get printed in a lot of precons as well, which is really cool. 35 in here, which is a little under, you know, what the recommended average is, but it's not too bad for this deck because we really top out most of our mana curve at 3. There are very few cards above 3 in our deck. You know, some of them are like Blasphemous Act that can be reduced in mana cost, or like Clever Concealment, that sort of thing. But we don't need a whole lot of lands, and we do have a good amount of ramp in the deck to kind of, you know, get away with that. I will say the only thing is we have a lot of X spells in the deck, so you can pump into whatever you want to, which sort of skews that a little bit. But I think this is the fun amount for what we're doing. You know, we're pretty low to the ground, and we have a lot of mana fixing, which is also nice. We're running all the pain lands that we can, you know, Battlefield Forge and that sort of thing. Give a Koilos. We're running all 3 Verges, so all the new ones from Aether Drift and Duskmourn, which is really cool. You know, the check lands, whether they be, you know, basic land types. We have the one Tangle in our colors to run in here. With Smoldering Marsh to check for our basic lands. We have the slow lands, so, you know, enters untapped as long as you control 2 or more lands, which is good for most of the game. All 3 of the filter lands, because those finally have gotten reprinted and have come down in value. I also added the Triumph. We don't have any fetches in the deck, but I liked having the Triumph in here as sort of a splashy land card, solely for the fact that we have so many cards in the deck, whether it be the Verges or, you know, our you know, check lands that care about a specific land type that we have, that having the Tri-land can be nice for those effects, because it turns all of them on immediately, having all 3 of the land types that we run. We've got, I really do like Windbrisk Kite, so this is kind of a cool one. I try to run all these hideaway cards when I can. It's got a hideaway, so you look at the top, 4 cards of your library, and you exile 1 face down under it. It can tap for a white, and you can pay a white and tap it to play the exile card without paying its mana cost, as long as you've attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn, which for this deck is pretty easy to do, since we're, you know, we're attack triggers deck, you know, get something good off of that. And one of the precon cards, and a really cool card for this sort of thing, sort of an additive, Vault of the Archangel. You can pay 4 to give your creatures Death Touch and Lifelink till end of turn. You can do this at instant speed, so if you've gotten through with a lot of stuff, or even if you have Reconnaissance, something that, you know, you can kind of just get through, it's kind of nice. But a lot of times it's even better before combat, because this not only gives yourself Lifelink, which can be nice, but the Death Touch to kind of deter any sort of blocking. And we've got a good amount of basics in here. Of course, our Command Tower and Exotic Orchard. I even threw in a Fabled Passage just in case, because we do, like I said, have a lot of the things that check for our land type. So having one of those in there kind of is like an extra Sabai Triumph where we're going to get what we need. Besides that, nothing too crazy. Sort of, you know, a little more expensive. Some of these Verges are, you know, first printing, and that sort of thing. And of course, the Triumph is a little more expensive, but nothing too crazy. And you could always, you know, take this down a notch. You don't need the Triumph or the Verges. There's plenty of other, if you want to play your tapped lands, you totally can. I try to shy away from any true tapped lands in my decks, especially decks like this where we're kind of aggro and we want to get our mana up when we can. But there's a lot of great options anymore that are very cheap. In terms of ramp, we have some sort of weird ones in here. So Battle Hymn is one of the weirder ones. This is kind of a win more card. It relies on the number of creatures we control to add that much red to our mana pool. So if we have like 6 creatures, this is an awesome ritual spell. But, you know, can be good or bad, you know, way better later in the game, when we can get a bunch of mana, cast a bunch of things, and kind of get a lot off of that. Dark Ritual throws in any black deck. It's just too good not to. Jessica's Will, of course, is, you know, the other side of the effect, which is one of the things that make it a game changer, is the fact that you can add red for each card in target opponent's hand, which a lot of times is 7, so 3 mana, get 7 back is pretty good for a ritual. We've got Ashnod's Altar in here to sacrifice our creatures for mana, so when we make our creature tokens. You know, sometimes I've even done it before where I sort of chain token creation spells where, you know, you pour X into a spell, create a bunch of tokens, and then with Ashnod's Altar you get double that mana back, so you can sort of chain that together to make a bunch more tokens after that. Phyrexian Altar, of course, as well, to make sure we get our colored mana when we need it. Indulge is kind of an interesting thing for this deck. We mostly care about the extra side, the aftermath part of it, which makes it's not a super reliable ramp spell, though most of the time if you're playing this card, you want to play them both in the same turn. The aftermath side, of course, says create a treasure token for each creature that dealt damage this turn. So, you know, if you got 10 creatures, you know, mobilize whatever, cast this from the graveyard, and make a bunch of treasure tokens on top of that, which is really nice. Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, and Talisman of Conviction are only, you know, artifact ramp spells, are mana rocks. Not a lot in there, because we have a lot of different ways to get stuff. Of course, we talked about Pitiless Plunder earlier. Of course, when our creatures die, we get treasure tokens, and we've got a lot of ways for our creatures to die or sack them in the deck. So it's kind of a fairly reliable sort of sack outlet. Speaking of, if we can get Worn Soul Treader and Pitiless Plunder on the battlefield at the same time, it's really nice. This is a new one from Modern Horizons 3. It says pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature to get a treasure token. It's not only that sack outlet, but the ability to give us the treasures right on top of that, which is really nice. Lastly, professional Facebreaker. A lot of tongue twister type cards in this. They get really long names and they're kind of hard to pronounce. But whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So if you're attacking all 3 players you control, or all 3 of your opponents, you can get up to 3 treasure tokens. So that's kind of nice, a little bit of extra. And most of the time you're going wide enough that you can always usually hit that 3 as well. And it has menace, so it itself can get through as well, which is kind of nice there. And like I was talking about, sack outlets. So we do have, of course, Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar, and Worn Soul Trader. We even talked about Skullclamp and Viscera Seer, sort of our ways to sacrifice creatures, because our Zurgo cares about creatures dying, and specifically cares about them dying as long as they were attacking. So we don't want them to die to their mobilize trigger. We want them to die usually at the end of combat if we are trying to get the draw triggers off of him. So being able to sacrifice them at instant speed, especially with like a Viscera Seer or Ashnod's Altar. Usually the Viscera Seer type of thing. Really the best one I think for combat stuff is Goblin Bombardment, where you can sacrifice a creature to deal 1 damage to any target. That's really, really nice because you can sort of ping stuff down, either hit people in the face for extra, you can kind of double up on your damage. You're swinging with 10 things and sacrifice those 10 things and do 10 extra damage. That's really nice. And in that same vein, if you wanted to wait to post combat to where Zurgo does a bunch of damage, you could do a whole lot in 1 turn, depending on what ends up getting through, but that's kind of nice to be able to spot remove, pick stuff off if you need to. Viscera Seer is our card advantage out of that. And the one I haven't talked about yet here is Yawgmoth. So Yawgmoth got protection from humans, kind of weird, but we care about his sacrifice ability. It says pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature, and draw a card. So this draws us a card on top of sacrificing stuff, so Zurgo can kind of double up on that. It also has the Goblin Bombardment effect of hitting something for a damage. So this is honestly better a lot of times than that, mostly in the fact that it's a -1/-1 counter, so you can kind of overturns. They don't lose those counters. The damage does go away at the end step, at the cleanup step, but with these -1/-1 counters, they stick around, so you can kind of keep them low and sort of chip away as you need to. And he does have pay 2 black, discard a card, proliferate. We don't really care about that in this deck. You might end up, using it at some point if you really want to proliferate your -1/-1 counters, but it's mostly the sacrifice outlet, and the card draw is very nice on that. And we have a whole lot of stuff that makes tokens. We've already talked about quite a few in here. I'm going to kind of run down the ones we haven't. So Adeline, of course, is a really, really awesome one. Its power is equal to the number of creatures you control, which is amazing, and a lot of times will get out of hand. It says whenever you attack, for each opponent, you create a 1/1 white human attack, tapped and attacking them. So that's really nice. Of course, it's sort of a mobilized trigger, except you get 3 tokens. They're attacking everyone. One of my favorites and an awesome card for this deck, especially with our Aristocrat theme that I really, really love, from the clue set, kind of weirdly enough, with Ravnica, is Afterlife Insurance. So it's a 2-mana instant that says creatures you control gain Afterlife 1 till end of turn and draw a card. So not only is it a cantrip, but Afterlife 1 is an effect that says whenever a creature with Afterlife 1 dies, you create a 1/1 white spirit, black and white spirit token with flying. So that's really awesome. That's kind of upgrading a lot of your, mobilized creatures. So if they're already going to die to their end step trigger, you can just kind of use this if you're creating a bunch of them. You get the card draw, you get new creatures, you get to sacrifice all of them for value for that, and then they come back as flyers, which is really, really nice. This is awesome to play in response to a board wipe, if you're getting Blasphemous Acted, or you could even do this in response to a Blasphemous Act. A lot of cool things you can do with this. It can be sort of a more interaction piece, but I usually like it as, for this deck, something where you're like, okay, I have a bunch of tokens, I sacrifice them to Goblin Bombardment, deal a whole bunch of damage, but before, you do that, play this, you get a bunch more tokens, and either, just keep them around, sacrifice them, whatever. It kind of just gives you that sort of snowball effect of doing a whole bunch at once. I talked about it a little bit, but one of the modes of Caesar is to create 2 1/1 red and white soldier creature tokens with haste that are tapped and attacking, so that's kind of nice. Call the Copper Coats. This is one of my all-time favorites because it's reliant on your opponent's stuff. So if they're outpacing you, it's a really awesome catch-up card. So it's a 3-mana instant that has Strive, so you can pay 2 for each target beyond the first. It says choose any number of target opponents and create X 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures those opponents control. So this one, honestly, in my token decks has outperformed almost every other card in the deck. It's kind of insane, mostly because of the instant speed. That's really good because you can give these tokens pseudo haste. But if someone's got like 7 creatures and someone else has 5, playing 5 mana for this, the 3 original and then 1 Strive cost for 12 tokens or whatever, what have you, is kind of insane. This does a whole lot and is a really awesome thing because, a lot of people are playing tokens or, have a good amount of creatures on their battlefield at some point. So kind of mid to late game, this can absolutely blow stuff out of the water. And of course, if you don't have a board, it can give you an instant board state. Very, very, very good card. I definitely recommend this for the deck. It's amazing. and it's actually kind of gone up a little bit in price, which is a little surprising to me, but you know, it is an awesome card, so definitely worth picking up. Talked about Caretaker's Talent, being able to pay the extra mana to level it up to create an extra copy of a creature we control. Most of the time, this is just, hey, we don't have a creature we can create on our turn, so we're just going to pay 1 to get the draw trigger. Deadly Dispute creates as a treasure token. Fourth Aer Lingus, this is another really cool one from the Lord of the Rings Commander set. It creates X 2/2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste, so kind of the best creatures we can create token-wise in the deck, which is really nice. And then whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, or one or more players this turn, you become the monarch. So as long as you get through with something, you become the monarch. Kind of an extra thing there. Mostly the fact that it creates 2/2s that can immediately attack, which is very, very nice with that. One of the ones from the main set, Frontline Rush. So this creates 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, and that's kind of the main effect here, is just giving us a little bit of extra. But it also gives the extra effect, which is really nice, is target creature +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. That can be really insane, you know, after blocks or before damage is dealt. Give something, you know, usually like your commander, if you're attacking with like 10 creatures, and you can pump Zurgo to like a 13 or even lethal at a lot of times. That's really, really nice for the 2 mana. It kind of comes out of nowhere. I do like a lot of these instant speed pump effects because they can really destroy stuff. Grand Crescendo, it's sort of an interesting one, and I think it's one of the better sort of token creators. X white instant speed, which is the biggest deal here. Having instant speed token creation is really big because it, like I said, it kind of adds the haste text to whatever tokens you're creating. Of course, you create X 1/1 white creature citizen tokens, and creatures you control gain indestructible till end of turn. So this is sort of a interaction piece, you know, protection piece. But you know, it's kind of sad if you have to use it for that, because it's a really good interaction or a really good token creation spell. Though I do like it has that kind of modular effect of being able to be used as an interaction piece if you really need it. If you just need to pay 2 white, no into the X, or even 1 to the X, get yourself a token and give yourself indestructible. Really, really awesome card, and I'm glad I got a reprint in the Commander deck. Hero of Bladehold is a really cool one because it's got Battle Cry, which is an effect that you could add more into the deck. Just whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 till end of turn. Kind of already talked about how much even just a +1/+0 or +2/+0, that pump effect for how many creatures that we're creating is really important, and you can double, triple the damage that we're dealing. And then of course, when this attacks, you can create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. And even with this own card, it's awesome because when it attacks, you can stack the triggers to make the tokens first and then have the Battle Cry resolve. So those attacking tokens are 2/1s until end of turn, which is really nice. But of course, it kind of just gives us extra tokens. It does a lot of different stuff for the deck, which is nice. Idol of Oblivion technically has the ability to create a token. We don't really ever use it. It's not very good. You pay 8 mana and sacrifice it to create a 10/10 Eldrazi. It's just a 10/10. It doesn't do anything, and it's really expensive. So this is kind of a last-ditch effort if you really, really need it, because of course you're also taking away a card draw engine. So most of the time that's not really available or, you know, needed. But, you know, it's a token, so kind of threw it in this category as well. Indulge, we've talked about the sort of ramp side of it, but the Indulge part of Indulge Access is it's sorcery speed, 3 mana spell that says whenever a creature you control attacks this turn, create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token that's tapped and attacking. So a lot of times you can effectively double the number of creatures that are attacking, which is really cool. You know, this doesn't count for stuff like the Hero Bladehold type effect or mobilize effects, because they aren't technically declared attacking, but we still have a lot of non-token creatures, or even if you keep around a few tokens that were around, whatever you attack with, this can be really nice. Even if you don't get a whole lot out of the Indulge part of it, just getting into your graveyard so you can cast access afterwards is worth it a lot of the times, even if you get only, you know, 2 or 3 extra tokens out of it. Though I have, you know, combined these two effects are so nice. I really, really like this card because it can just blow stuff out of the water. You know, not only are you getting a huge board state with the attack trigger, but generating a bunch of mana a lot of times afterwards as well. Very awesome card, very, very much recommended for the deck as well. We've got Redoubled Stormsinger, so this is another one of the precon cards. I think it's really neat. Very powerful effect if used in the right way. It's got First Strike and says whenever this creature attacks, for each creature token you control that entered this turn, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that token. At the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice those tokens. So this literally just doubles all of your triggers pretty much, where you have all your mobilized stuff go off first, and then you have this resolve. So you make a whole bunch of tokens, or even just, you know, regular tokens that you made from like your Grand Crescendo type effects. Make those all tapped and attacking. And the cool thing with that specifically is the fact that you can play like Grand Crescendo or, really Song of Totentens or something that creates tokens, like Fourth Aerlingus on your turn, even if they technically can attack or don't have haste. This makes tokens that are copies of those tokens, whether or not they, attack this turn, that are tapped and attacking, which is really, really cool. This is a really, really powerful effect, and I think is one of the sort of Craterhoof type finale effects for the deck, because it just does a whole bunch of extra, really turns on our game plan that we're trying to go through. Song of Totentens is probably my favorite one. I really like Grand Crescendo for the fact that instant speed, but the fact that this is one of the few token creator effects that are X cost spells that only cost X and 1, really, puts more mileage onto this. Getting that extra token out of it is really, really nice. So this creates X1 black rat creature tokens that can't block, but it gives creatures you control haste till end of turn. So that's also the big part of it. So even if you're, made a few extra tokens from, other sources, this gives all your stuff haste. So if you cast even like a regular card, let's say you cast Adeline and then you cast Totentans for like 1 or 2, you're getting a good amount of things to be able to attack with, and stuff like her trigger and the mobilized triggers gives you even more tokens on top of that. So this is awesome as a haste outlet. Will of the Mardu is one of the ones from the Commander deck as well, one of the Will series. They've added a few more for Tarkir. I love all these Will cards. They're usually extremely good. So for 3 mana, as long as you control your commander, you get to choose both modes of the spell. Otherwise, you can only choose one. That's kind of part of the Will series. So the first one, the one we care about for token creation, is you create a number of 1/1 red warrior creature tokens equal to the number of creatures target player controls. So this can, by itself, it's really, really nice for the fact that it's very toolboxy, where if you're already doing really well, you can just make a bunch of tokens equal to the number of tokens you control. You have 7 tokens, cast this, make another 7. You have 14 to attack with. It is instant speed, so you can give your stuff pseudo haste. So it's kind of a lot of times can end up being a better Call the Copper Coats, depending on how many creatures. Call the Copper Coats is nice if multiple opponents have a lot of creatures, but a lot of times it'll be like one dude has like 9 of them, and so you can kind of just get a lot of value off of that, which is really, really nice. And it also has that second effect, where if you can use both, this is an insane card, where it says it deals damage equal to target creature equal to the number of creatures you control. So it can snipe something on top of that. Kind of a secondary effect that we don't care about as much. The token creation is definitely the biggest part here, but kind of just an amazing card overall. Windcrag Siege. So this has the ability, it's one of the new Siege cards where you choose one of 2 of the modes when it enters, and then it permanently is that mode. So it has Jeskai. At the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 red goblin token. It gets lifelink and haste till end of turn. That's kind of the lukewarm part of it. We don't really care about that token creation effect. And if you really, really need to, it can be kind of nice, but mostly it's the fact of the Mardu side of it, where if a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So all of our attack triggers double. So this includes really the biggest thing here is the mobilized trigger. So we can double that many tokens, which is awesome. Very, very nice with that. There's a lot of different things. This also counts as well. If you can get both this doubler and, the token doubler, there's a lot of effects you can kind of combine in this deck. Just 2 or 3 different cards that can really spiral the number of tokens you're making out of hand. So that's kind of the biggest part of this card, is just the extra sort of attack trigger effect. And then you have the other Zurgo from the main set in here. It's got Mobilize too, which of course is just kind of nice to have. But it also says during your end step, warrior tokens you control have this token that can't be sacrificed. And the biggest thing here is all of our Mobilize stuff creates tokens that normally have to be sacrificed at end step. So Zurgo, this Zurgo specifically, gets rid of the sort of second end step trigger, which is really nice. Either if we don't have a second right now, just keeping those tokens around is, the one downside of Mobilize is that they get to go at the end step. And so if you don't have something to sack them too, they kind of just die. It can sort of work against your favor if you want those tokens to die, because of course Zurgo just cares about tokens dying after comment. They just make people lose life, which is kind of nice, just an extra sort of blood artist type of effect, though most of the time it's better to keep them around for them to deal damage. If you can't sacrifice them to one of your own effects, you might as well keep them around if you can. And so this Zurgo is really good for that effect, to sort of just kind of keep your board state building and building on itself. And then lastly, we have the value category. So this is just a bunch of stuff that doesn't fit into anything other category specifically. The biggest one here and sort of our real finisher is Akroma's Will. So this is one of the original Will Cycles cards. says choose one. If you control your commander, of course, you get to choose both. In the 2 modes, either one of them is really good, but both of them together is just kind of, insane. So the first one says creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike till end of turn. That by itself is awesome for 4 mana. That's going to be enough, just the double strike itself. The evasion is really cool, flying, and of course, no crackback with vigilance. But the double strike a lot of times is what's going to get you there. And the second part of the effect says creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from each color till end of turn. And that's sort of the other part of it. If you need to get through more than to deal extra damage, or if you need the life gain, giving protection from all colors is really nice because it allows you to get through most creatures on the battlefield, as long as you're not colorless. Like a Solemn Simulacrum or something like that doesn't have a color. This is kind of one of the better effects to try to just get through. You have to be careful because if you have anything that you want to target with the creature, there's not a whole lot in this deck that targets creatures that we control, but once you cast this, if you have any of your own stuff that's colored that you want to target your stuff with, that'll be off if you get the second mode. But together, of course, this is the best thing because you get the double strike, you get the lifelink, and then indestructible. If you really needed to, this is another one of those cards that technically can save your board by giving your creatures indestructible till end of turn. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that second line of text. This is obviously just going to be like, hey, I cast this, I win the game most of the time, but it does have that little bit of extra at the end if you really need it. Another card I really wanted to highlight from the main set here is All Out Assault. So this is one of these kind of a weird enchantments. I don't think I've ever seen a sort of additional combat clause on an enchantment before, outside of like Aggravated Assault, which of course this is sort of playing off of being All Out Assault. But this one is just an ETB trigger. When this enters, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase, followed by an additional main phase. When you attack this turn, untap each creature you control. So that's also kind of nice because when you attack, if you can sort of, if you wanted to, make this more of an attack-centric deck where you're taking extra, combat steps, not something you can do in lower brackets too much. So if you're trying to skew more towards, the main precon and being more towards, the bracket 2, you can't put too many of those in there. It's kind of an overwhelming effect to chain extra combats, at least in a lot of pods. But it's nice for that because if you are chaining extra effects, this says whenever you attack this turn, untap each creature you control. So that means, a lot of the downside of the sort of extra combat stuff is at the end of those combats, your creatures are still tapped, even if they, the sorcery or whatever untaps them. They'll leave your turn still being tapped. So this automatically untaps them anytime you attack. So you just get that effect by itself, which is really cool. And then of course, kind of the main thing here, it's nice to have the extra combat, but the fact that it gives creatures you control +1/+1 and death touch. So of course that, Anthem effect is really nice for our tokens, and the death touch by itself is also very cool. If people it's evasion in the way that we can either just kill creatures on our opponent's board to sort of dwindle their supply if they have to block, or a lot of times it just prevents them from blocking because they don't want the creatures to die. One tutor in this deck, we've got Diabolic Intent, and I just felt it fit really well. So it's basically just a demonic tutor, but it has an additional cost to cast it. You sacrifice a creature, which, we're going to have plenty of creatures most of the time. It triggers a lot of our stuff. So kind of a lot of extra upside to that most of the time. But then you just search your library for any card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. I don't run too many of these in a lot of these decks if they're not like super highly focused. Once I get more towards bracket 4, I put more of them because, it makes it like a little more homogenous and more efficient. Every time you put a tutor in, you're able to search what you need to, the more high power cards to be able to end stuff out. If you need a Chroma's Will, the more tutors you put in there, the more often you can get that card when you need it. So just kind of a little fun one here randomly to give us, every once in a while we'll have that ability to get our synergy piece if we need it. Dread Return, I love this in any sort of graveyard or token deck. So it's a 4 mana reanimate spell that says return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is, a very poor rate for just the spell itself, but it has flashback. So as long as it's in the graveyard, you can pay this flashback cost. You exile the spell after it's done resolving, but its flashback cost doesn't actually cost any mana. It just says sacrifice 3 creatures. So that's kind of the big thing here. Same thing with the Diabolic Intent, where we're going to have creatures to sacrifice most of the time. And this is just a free reanimation spell for that. So that's really cool if we have, some of our regular creatures, like if someone ended up killing our Pitiless Plunderer or something that we want out, or even, something like a sacrifice outlet that we want to get back, we can do that very easily with Dread Return without any mana being spent. So that's really the best part about Dread Return. Ishin is sort of the original attack trigger creature. It is same cost as our commander, and says if creature attacking causes a triggered ability of permanent you control the trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So again, just sort of an enabler for the deck. You know, it's got a decent body, being a 3-mana 3/4. You can attack with it if you want to, but it's mostly to sit around and look pretty, as you know, you get a bunch of extra mobilized triggers off of it. Lightning Greaves, I just put this in here because it's nice to have for a lot of our, you know, mobilized creatures are non-token creatures that need to attack. You know, this does a lot of extra because it's of course Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves are just kind of generally good for most decks because they protect their creatures and allow them to, you know, have haste, either active abilities or whatnot. But it's really awesome for the deck, mostly because of the haste. We like having, you know, the sort of extra anti-interaction piece with the Shroud, but mostly the fact that we can get, you know, a sort of pseudo haste outlet for our stuff, being allowed to give some sort of creature that enter the battlefield, allow them to attack immediately, get triggers off of them is kind of the biggest thing there. Rising in the Day, so just sort of a generic give all our creatures haste for 3 mana, which is really nice. And then it does have the weird kind of extra effective giving legendary creatures we control +1/+0, but mostly the fact that it's just kind of a cheap, easy to use sort of mass haste outlet. Last but not least, here we have Victimize. So this is another really awesome card. I love this as a reanimation spell. It's 3 mana. It says choose 2 target creatures in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this is awesome. 3 mana to reanimate 2 things. Usually getting rid of a token. The stuff that does return is tapped, which for every deck doesn't matter. It matters a little bit more for our deck because we have a lot of attack triggers. But even then, being able to reanimate for that cost, 2 things, you know, there's not a lot of cards in the game that can reanimate more than 1 creature for that rate at the same time. So that's really nice there. Kind of just a really awesome card. I like throwing that into most black decks as well. Just as kind of a piece that can get us back our big stuff or just our important pieces. Even, you know, if you can get back an Ishin or something like that, or even like an Ishin and Zurgo, stuff that doesn't need to attack, or you know, things that don't need immediately care about being tapped that you can immediately use. It's kind of the best case scenario, but any of it really. Just nice to have the little bit of recursion ability with those cards. But yeah, that is this Zurgo deck. Kind of a cool, weird Mardu, good stuffy, attack triggered tokens Aristocrat. It's kind of got a lot of different areas to go with, but we're very much, of course, focused on the tokens. I think there's a lot you can do with this deck, and I really like the specific way. You could more definitely go towards you know, other creatures that make tapped and attacking tokens, if you want to go more, you know, physical creatures, non-token creatures, or you could even lean more heavily than I did into, you know, the sorcery speed or instant speed things that, you know, create tokens of non-permanent token creation there. I think that's one of the ways to get the most tokens out of it. You could add more ritual type stuff in here. Like I said, this deck can be mana hungry because we have those X spells in here. So a mana geyser or something you could totally add. There's always room to upgrade the mana base if you really wanted to, but I think right now, for what it is, as a really heavily upgraded precon, if you could even call that, more of a Zurgo deck with some precon splashed in, I think it's a really awesome deck. Does a lot of cool stuff, you know, pretty low to the ground, get in there and hit you with a lot of different things, a lot of extra value off of our stuff. And that's really what I try to emphasize with a lot of these decks, is the ability to, you know, take every aspect of the commander and really kind of push it to its limit. That's very much what we're doing with Zurgo and his ability to sacrifice creatures. But yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this deck list. If you want to take a look at this deck list along with all the other deck lists I have done, I will leave the Moxfield link in the description. I will also leave a link to all the other deck list videos I've done in the YouTube playlist down there as well, if you want to check that out. But besides all of that, I will see all of you in the next one.